Hi guys, Liesel here. I just wanted to let you know that the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, as you know it, is getting a huge facelift. I'm so excited. We don't have a definite launch date in mind yet, but girl, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. In the meantime, please enjoy this re-air of a fan favorite episode and stay tuned to my Instagram stories for updates on when the new and improved Mommy Labor Nurse podcast will be back with all new episodes. You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, episode number 78. Hey guys, happy Monday. So I have a really cool episode this week. This week, I had Caitlyn come onto the podcast and talk all about her adoption story of her son. And I realized that a lot of you guys have no idea how adoption works. I'm sure some of you that follow me maybe have adopted in the past, or maybe you're in the adoption process now and you've already I don't know. But I realize that most of you don't, because most of my followers are pregnant ladies, let's be honest. But I still think adoption is a way to become a parent, obviously. So I think it's something that we need to talk about on the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. So this episode is really special and really, really cool. And I had a really awesome time recording it with Caitlyn because she just told her story so well. And I still get goosebumps recording the intro because I'm thinking about the conversation that we had and how special it was. So I'm not going to spoil too much about her story, but it's very special and I hope you guys enjoy it.
You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, where we firmly believe in the power of education when it comes to giving birth. Tune in each week as we dive into pregnancy-related topics, expert interviews, and a variety of birth stories. As a reminder, anything you hear on this podcast is not medical advice. Please see mommylabornurse.com/disclaimer for more details. And now here's your host, educator, registered nurse, and fellow mom, Liesel Teen.
Wondering what you need to do to stay on track during each week of pregnancy? Not sure what you need to be learning or researching along the way? I can help. Sign up for our free weekly pregnancy series to get tips, advice, and resources tailored to your exact week of pregnancy sent straight to your inbox every week. Sign up at mommylabornurse.com/IamPregnant to get your first email today. See you in your inbox real soon. Hi, Caitlyn. Welcome to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
So happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you just start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your family, where you're from, whatever you want to add?
Yeah. So again, my name is Caitlyn, and I am a working mom. I work for a large investment firm. I've been married to my husband, Jake, for 5.5 years. Been together since we were 19 years old, little babies. And so, yeah. And then we actually have an almost 9-month-old son, AJ. He's going to be 9-month-old tomorrow. So, and he just joined our family through adoption this past June when he was born.
Yeah.
And then we're actually also expecting a daughter. So that's actually how I found Mommy Labor Nurse, because I took your course. And so we're excited. She's going to be born somewhere around June 2nd. So
Awesome.
We're really excited. Yeah.
Oh, yay. Congrats. That's great. And you already know, I was going to say it's March, April, May, June. So you're what, six months?
6.5. Yeah.
27?
Yeah. 29 weeks.
Okay.
So yeah. Yeah. There'll be, yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. We'll have, for a month, we'll have 2 under 1. So that'll be really crazy, but we're excited.
Well, my other, girl who works for me, I call her my other girl, my employee and good friend, Tiffany, who works for me. She, hers weren't under 1, but her boys are 13 months apart. So she knows all too well
yeah,
it was 2 under 2 for quite a while.
Right. For a whole year, basically. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, cool. Well, guys, if you haven't guessed what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about AJ and his adoption story. So Caitlyn, if you want to, usually what I do with birth stories is I kind of have people go back and talk about, getting pregnant and, starting all of that. So, since you weren't pregnant with him, do you want to go back and kind of maybe talk about like why you got interested in adopting, and I guess kind of start from the beginning?
Yeah. So, again, my husband and I have been together since we were like 19 years old.
Yeah.
Our faith has played a big part in our lives. So we actually met at youth group. And one of the things that we both kind of knew from the beginning of even dating was adoption was something we both felt really strongly about, something that we wanted to do to grow our families at some point. And we kind of knew that was something we'd want to do. And also trying to have kids biologically was something we'd want to do. We didn't know what order that would be, but it was just always something we kind of knew we wanted to do both of those avenues for growing our family. Fast forward to when we were actually ready to start our family. There's a lot of different reasons of why we decided to pursue adoption first before trying to have kids biologically, but ultimately that was something we ended up landing on. One of the big factors was just that we knew that there's a lot that goes into the adoption process. There's a lot of time and resources and energy that it takes to go through that. And so we knew we're not going to be getting any more of that as we get older. And if we have, more kids, that's just going to make things more complicated. And so we just ultimately decided that that was how we wanted to start our family. We kind of always had the 5-year plan, if you will, from getting married to starting. And that's kind of, we were on year 4 and we were like, okay, are we ready to kind of start talking about this? And that's when we started. So in summer of 2019, we started the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. So I guess when you started, what does that look like? So I think people listening, like I personally want to know, if I'm like, what, I'm thinking about adopting, like, where do I even like start that process?
Yeah. So there's definitely multiple different avenues that somebody could go down to pursue adoption. So one of the most common that you'll hear is private infant adoption. Mm-hmm. And even within that, there's a couple different realms of avenues of ways you could go with that. Yeah. But that's just kind of what you typically think of with agencies. Yeah. Working with an agency, going through them, getting matched with a expectant pregnant mother, and then going that route. So that's private infant adoption. There's also international adoptions. So, you kind of pick a country and kind of figure out what their laws are and what their adoption processes look like. And then there's also foster care, which, is different. Foster care, kind of the purpose of foster care is to be temporary in most cases, but then ultimately, oftentimes there will be situations where parental rights have to get waived. And so then adoption can take place through that. So yeah, we decided just with our circumstances and where we were that we wanted to pursue private infant adoption. And so again, multiple different avenues even within that. But what we ended up doing was working with, it's called an adoption consultant. So there's a couple different organizations out there that, essentially they work with multiple different agencies. Again, oftentimes you go through one agency. You can, if you do infant adoption, you can sign up with one agency and you go through their process. The consultants kind of work with multiple different agencies. You kind of go through them and they help you throughout the process and have different relationships with multiple agencies.
Got it. So it's kind of like a rep. Like you have somebody who like kind of just has contacts everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And they've gone through the process oftentimes themselves. And they just have a lot of different connections and they help with all the different aspects of the process. I wish we can get into what those aspects are.
Yeah. No, I would love for you to talk about that too. So I'm thinking like, this is, I don't know, but I'm thinking of like the Friends episode with Chandler where they were adopting and they had somebody come into their house and like assess their home. So I guess I mean, you see how naive I am to know the whole process. Is that kind of how it works? Or like what other steps?
Yeah. I love that you referenced that because Friends is like one of my favorite shows ever.
Yeah. I've seen every episode.
Yeah. No, it's definitely not far off from that. So that's definitely the first step. No matter what avenue you choose to go, it's called the home study. And what the home study is it's basically whatever state you live in, deeming that you're able to have a child in your home, saying that your home is safe, saying that you guys are, able to be parents. It can kind of seem a little bit scary because you're, like in the Friends episode, you kind of feel nervous that somebody's coming in and judging you. In reality, it's just they're trying to make sure that what you're saying about yourself, like as far as your background checks and saying where you live and what your home looks like, matches up, and that you're able to take care of a child. So it's not too scary, but it is a lot of paperwork, and it does require somebody to come in and look at your home and talk with you. And so it definitely is a whole process. I know for us it took about 4 months to get home study approved. So, and it can be shorter or longer depending on how many different, things you have going on in your life. Like if you have more kids, there's just a lot more that's required. I know we needed a lot of medical, records and financial records and background checks and all of those things. So it just can take a while to get everything processed.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. But I didn't realize that it could take that long. I wonder, too, so with the process, when you have somebody come in, I'm just thinking about like COVID. I wonder if they have been able to do that virtual. I mean, I'm sure that people now probably just wear masks, or like if it's any different with COVID. You obviously were probably, did it.
Yeah. Ours was, and we can get a little bit more into this later, but we did, that beginning part of the process was pre-COVID, but then when our son was born was during COVID. And then there's also follow-up meetings that generally the same person that does your home study will also come and do these follow-up meetings. And so, for us personally, those, were in person before, but then the follow-up meetings were not in person. They were virtual. So
Makes sense. So, okay, let's get a little bit deeper. So let's go back to kind of your story. So you're saying that the first thing you kind of did was this home study thing. And then I guess kind of what were the next steps?
Yeah. So just the way that we did it, and again, this is my perspective coming from like working with a consultant where we had the multiple agencies that we were kind of working with through the consultant. The way that they worked is you kind of pick the agencies that you want to work with once your home study approved and ready. And from those agencies, that's when you'll start to get what are called situations. And those are the situations that come up with pregnant mothers that are wanting to make an adoption plan, or sometimes it's even children that were just already born. And maybe the, mother didn't know that she was pregnant, or, just decided at the hospital that was something that she wanted to do. Yeah. And so one of the other things I forgot to mention with those situations, and I guess we could get into that, is this whole profile book that has to get created. That's something that we also did during the home study time, because we knew that we'd have to have this ready for once we were home study approved. Okay. It's a big deal in the adoption world, is these profile books. So it's kind of your book about yourself and your family. It's kind of whatever you want it to be. And when those situations get sent to you, that's what you're presenting to those pregnant mothers for them to choose families from. So.
Gotcha. So is there a process of where it sounds like, you get to choose in some regard, and then they also get to choose.
Exactly. Yeah. So we would get sent, once we picked the agencies that we wanted to work with, we would get sent the situations that matched with what we were looking for, which in our case, we didn't have any preferences in regards to anything other than age. So we just said we were interested in any child under a year old. for a number of different reasons, people might decide that they have other preferences as far as, gender or, like race and things like that. Yeah. Disabilities, things like that. So.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So I guess you make kind of your profile, and that's almost like a resume that you would hand.
Yeah.
Somebody. I mean, I'm still going back to the Friends episode because they did this all in Friends too. Remember,
Yep.
like Monica was the doctor and Chandler was the reverend.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and there is definitely was, the process has changed, I think, a lot even since the Friends episode came out, because it felt like a little bit. I know then where it was a little bit more anonymous. They didn't see pictures necessarily of what they looked like. They only thought they were meeting each other right in that moment when they met and found out, oh, wait, she thinks we're different people. Now it's like you get this whole profile book that has all these pictures and all these things about you. And so it's very clear. Yeah.
I would assume
there.
There's not a lot of like those kind of
no. Yeah.
It's more for TV. So
right.
Okay, cool. Well, let's get back into kind of your story. So I guess, you make this profile book and then do you just kind of wait and see what pops up?
Yeah. So essentially that's the big part of adoption is the process is the wait. And again, in our case, that's kind of how it worked for us with the agencies is they'd send us these situations. We'd say, yes, we want to present our profile to them. Mm-hmm. We'd give our profile and then we'd wait to hear back on what that, pregnant mother had decided. So for us, the wait was about 4.5 months, which is really short. I will say that's not the norm for adoptions. A lot of times it can take, potentially years to get a wait. So it just kind of depends on a lot of different factors. But we presented our profile 13 times. The 14th in her no for those 13. And then the 14th time was the yes.
Wow. And so with the situations where people say no, do they ever give you feedback? Is it no, you just never know if it's like personal kind of like, she decided not to adopt anymore, or it's just
right. We did generally, I can't speak for all of them, but I know for us, it was always just like she went with a different family, which was totally fine for us. Our perspective going into it, a big thing was that we felt we weren't trying to find a child for our family. We were trying to be the right family for a child. So it was a little bit easier to have that perspective when we heard no, because we just felt like, okay, well, we're just not the right family for that child, and that's totally okay. And, move on.
I love it. I love that perspective too, for anybody who's listening to have that mindset.
It's hard, but it's definitely, I think the best way to view it.
To look at it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's talk about when you actually did match. So what kind of happened after that?
It was seriously the craziest time of our lives. So
tell me about like the day and everything kind of revolved around.
Yeah. So again, we kind of already touched on this a little bit, but COVID had started pretty much. So we became active in waiting. It was January 2020. Mm-hmm. And then the world shut down in March. So we had been waiting, we were in the wait for it was the end of January that became active. So it was really like 2 months that we were in the wait. And then all of a sudden COVID started happening. We're like, oh gosh, how is this going to affect everything? Yeah. So thankfully for us, it didn't really seem to affect it, but so we had just been kind of presenting when it made sense to present to the situations. And it was in May and Mother's Day happened. And I was a little bit, it was probably the hardest day of the wait for me just because, I didn't know when I was going to be a mother. And it's just kind of one of those things that was a little bit tougher than some of the other days. And little known to us, 2 days later, we got sent our son's situation for the first time. And we decided to present to it. And again, these presenting to it, you just never know how long it's going to take to hear back. There were times that it took literally a day to hear back no. And then there were other times where it took 3 weeks, and they don't necessarily have a time frame because it just depends on that expectant mother, like what, how long it takes for her to make the decision. So again, we'd already kind of gone through it so many times that it was like, we kind of knew not to like get our hopes up. It was just, another situation that we were open to. And if we heard back, great. If not, whatever. And so wasn't really thinking about it. I think for his situation, we kind of knew it was going to be on the longer end. I think we kind of did have a heads up that she wasn't going to be choosing until a little bit later in May. Yeah. So the date rolled around. It was May 26th. I remember that, like, everything about it. I wasn't expecting anything. I really wasn't. It was the day after Memorial Day. I wasn't expecting to hear anything. And I was actually sitting on the phone on a client call. And after, my husband said, oh, have you seen the adoption email? We had like this adoption email. And that's where we'd hear back from these situations a lot of the times. And that was just something normal we'd say to each other all the time. Like if there was some news that came back. So I didn't think anything of it. And I opened the email and it was just like, it was my son's birth mom was picked us. And I was like, what? And, totally just broke down crying, was not expecting it at all. And I couldn't believe that my husband was able to keep it cool for that whole time that I was sitting on the phone. But he totally just played it off. And so what was crazier was that he was due July 1st, but given some of the things that we knew about his birth mother, we knew that we needed to kind of get ready earlier because it was most likely that he'd be born at least 2 weeks early, by an induction at the least, if not just naturally earlier. So we're in Illinois. I don't think I mentioned that, but we're outside of Chicago, and he was in Florida. And so this was, again, May 26th. He's potentially going to be born 2 weeks early, even maybe sooner. So we were like, oh my gosh, we need to leave like now. And so we decided it wasn't that weekend that we were going to leave, but it was the weekend after. And so we had like a week and a half notice to just kind of get everything together, everything ready, and go down and wait in Florida. So, it worked out really well, again, with COVID. Normally at that time, I wasn't able to work remotely, but because of COVID, I was. And so that's gave us the ability to just kind of get there earlier and wait. And so then we just kind of waited, and then he was born on June 19th.
This episode of the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast was brought to you by Mommy Labor Nurse. I've seen it in the delivery room time and time again. Mamas that complete some kind of childbirth education before they're due have a more positive birth. So then why do less than 1/3 of all moms take a birth class? Probably because so many of the options out there are either way too expensive, super inconvenient, or just don't offer mamas really what they need. That's why I created the Birth It Up online birthing classes. With Birth It Up, you'll gain the in-depth knowledge and confidence you need to have a better birth from the comfort of your own home at a price point that can't be beat. Head on over to mommylabornurse.com/courses to find the birth class that's right for you. And now let's get into this week's episode. Wow. Yeah. So tell me about that too. So when you go down, and I wonder about this too. So I guess it's always, unless it happens at the hospital in your town or something, it's very close. You do have to travel there, and there's some sort of waiting, I'm thinking about someone who's due. It might be a few weeks before, it might be a few weeks afterwards. There's really, so I guess, do they give you guidance on like, okay, let's go down when mom is 37 weeks, or I guess, it depends on her history. If she's, go preterm. So tell me about that too. Like what like, did you stay in a hotel or Airbnb or
Yeah.
what was that like?
No, that's a good question. So yeah, it totally depends. And for us personally, we haven't talked about this yet, but something we were interested in was having an open adoption. So like having a relationship with our son's birth mom and birth family.
Yeah.
So for us, we have an open relationship with her. And so, she didn't necessarily want us in the room, but she wanted us at the hospital and she wanted him to room with us at the hospital. So that was something we kind of talked about, which is why we decided to go early. So I think it can just depend on that type of situation. If that, the mother wants you to be there at the hospital, then, I think it's probably up to the discretion of you when to leave, right? If you're worried about there, being any chance that the baby's early. But yeah, I think it just totally depends on the situation that way. So
yeah, makes sense. All right. So he's born.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying that what happened was you were, you stayed in the hospital. And I think, and I just know just taking care of families that we've had that experience. That's usually, what happens if beforehand. The adopted family gets a postpartum room basically. And, mom still gets, birth mom still gets a postpartum room. And yeah, if it's open, then there's, crossover and baby can go kind of back and forth. If it's not, then baby typically, it's the last kind of, they just go to the adoptive parents.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess, tell me about that too, how the hospital was, and then kind of bringing him home and then bringing him home, like home.
Yeah. Yeah. So the hospital experience was really interesting just because of COVID.
Yeah.
We felt so lucky timing wise that we even got to be there because I know probably if it was a month earlier, we probably wouldn't have even been allowed in the hospital. So the fact that my husband and I were both allowed in, we were given a room, we were allowed to be there was amazing. The one downside was at that time, they wouldn't even let us leave the room essentially. So we brought some food, but we were not prepared to be there for 3 days without very much food, only the hospital food. And the nursing staff was great. No shade on them at all. It's just because of the situation, they kind of sometimes forgot to bring us stuff. They were very much concerned about AJ, but wouldn't necessarily remember that we were there and needed food too. So that was interesting. But yeah, we, like you said, we again have an open relationship with his birth mother. And so we wanted him to spend as much time with her as she wanted, and so he would get wheeled in his little cart back and forth between the rooms. He spent a couple, we were there for 3 days. She was there for 2 days. So over the 2 days, she would, spend a couple hours with him at a time, which was great. We were really happy that she wanted to spend the time with him. Yeah. And yeah, it was really interesting just being there in that. It felt like the nursing staff wasn't entirely sure what to do with us sometimes, which was interesting. But everybody was really respectful and very much wanted to make everything comfortable and very much understanding of our situation. So yeah, we brought him home after 3 days. Was on Father's Day, actually. So it was crazy that on Mother's Day, I was upset. And then by Father's Day, my husband was a father. Yeah. It was crazy. But so then we have to, there's this whole process called ICPC, which if you're adopting from a different state, you have to get the clearance to actually leave the state before leaving. So we had to stay in Florida still until we got that clearance. And I totally didn't mention the fact that in the hospital, he wasn't our son until his birth mother, signed her rights away, which is why we were really passionate about making sure that he was spending a lot of time with her, because he was not our son yet until, she had signed away the rights, and that dependent on the state. It's usually anywhere from 12 hours to 72 hours after birth. So for us, it happened, it was about 30 hours after his birth that happened. So, So anyways, after coming home, after bringing him back to the rental that we had in Florida, we had to still wait for an unknown amount of time for this ICPC to clear. So that was pretty hard, honestly, because we were there by ourselves, right? Our family was all up here in Illinois, and we had zero idea if it was going to be a couple days that we were still in Florida or if it was going to be a couple weeks. And so we just kind of had to sit and wait. And thankfully, I think it was like 5 days. And then we had to make the drive back up with a tiny little newborn, which
you probably, you wanted to drive and not fly, right?
Right. No, exactly. We did. Yeah. We felt like just with COVID and everything, it made the most sense to just drive. And it was like probably the maximum amount of time that we would drive. It was without stopping, it was like 16 hours, right? Which we honestly like barely stopped on the drive home. We didn't even stay anywhere overnight. We were just so ready to get home at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I can imagine like, okay, you know what? This is a long drive, but I'm going back home and I have my baby.
Yes.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. Well, there was a couple of things that came to mind. So I did want to ask, because I think this is something that people wonder about in regards to bonding. So when you first, had your son, had AJ, and first saw him in the first couple days, did you feel that immediate parental bond, or did it take you a few days? And also your husband too, I want to know kind of how he felt too. Cause I think people want, I've asked this question to a few different adoptive people that I know, and the answer is usually the same.
Yeah.
It's usually pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But not always. And I think that people who don't have any experience with adoption just wonder if there's like a barrier almost.
Yeah. And I'm interested, to be quite honest, I'm very interested to see, like, especially because the experiences are going to be so close, but like what it feels like between AJ and then our daughter right away, especially from my husband's perspective, because I think it'll be a little bit different for him than me, even just because both situations, he's not the one birthing the baby. But for me personally, I think, and I kind of touched on it already, but we had a very strong mindset that AJ's birth mom was not his birth mom until the papers were signed, because that was his mom still. Like, no matter what, he was not our child then. So for me, I couldn't just mentally get there until the papers were signed. But once they were, I truly felt, and even before they were signed, it was like hard to not feel the instant connection. So for me, I've felt pretty much right off the bat, instantly bonded and connected with him. Again, I can't speak to it without like having birthed a child yet to know like how it compares. But I know for me, I did feel really strongly attached, like pretty much right once the papers were signed. Yeah, exactly. It was like, oh my gosh, this is our child. He's really here. Especially just with all of the anticipation, for this month that we knew about him. Again, we were trying really hard to set that boundary of, he's not our child yet. There's a plan that he's going to be our child, but he's not our child yet. We're doing all these things like in the hopes that he will be. And so then once that actually was official, it was just this awesome feeling of relief, but then also, to be honest, a little bit of grief just for his birth mom, because we do care a lot about her and know that's such a hard decision that she had to make, and such a really courageous thing for her to do. And so, it is so many different emotions, but I definitely did feel connected right away.
No, I'm sure. I did have one other question too. So in terms of like signing the paperwork and that whole process, you said it's different in different states. But this is what I've kind of just heard, is that there is some sort of time frame that they can sign and then change their mind. Is that true? Or
it depends on the state. Yeah. So, for where we were in Florida, in our experience, I can just speak to what that experience was. It was, and my son's case, his father's not in the picture. His birth father's not in the picture. So it was just based off of his birth mother. So she had 24 hours after he was born, she could sign, or if she was being discharged earlier than the 24 hours, then she could sign at that point. But once she signs, it's irrevocable. But there are states where there is a period of time where it can change. I know some of the situations we got that were in different states, they talked about that. And I know like one of them ranged from like a month after signing that they could change their mind.
That's a long time.
It's a long time. And it's really hard to wrap your head around, especially if you're trying to come from the adoption again with the mindset of like, this is not my child until it's official, right? Because you want to be respectful of that, but then you also are kind of like, well, I have my rights too. But yeah, it's just trying to reconcile all of those feelings can be really, really difficult. I would say for me personally, and I've said this when I've talked about the experience, the wait, 4.5 month wait that we had to just hear yes was like nothing compared to that month-long wait, not sure if this was going to be our child or not.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, that is crazy. So, okay, side note, tell me about how, so he was born in June. Mm-hmm. How many months afterwards did you find out you were pregnant? What was that like? Because I have to ask you that.
Oh, no, of course. Yeah. So again, for us, we had always planned to grow our family both ways. We definitely weren't planning this fast to have another kid. So it was like he was, had just turned like 3 months old and found out. And I found out like right away. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I was so much more freaked out than my husband, which I was shocked by. I was just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And he was just like, it's not like we didn't want more kids. Like we were always planning on having more kids, but it could not be more perfect now that it's happening when it's happening. It's really cool. I'm really appreciative of being home and not having to go into work while I'm pregnant because it's been rough. And even just like trying to take care of another kid. And thankfully, AJ has been literally the chillest, easiest going kid ever. So that has made things a million times easier.
Always does. That's how Walter was. Ryland's a little bit more temperamental, but Walter was a good, happy-go-lucky baby. Yeah. And that does make it a lot easier when
easier. Yeah. No, I keep saying like, and I don't know for sure, but I can only imagine, surprisingly for us, things have been so easy. Like adding AJ into our family has been super, super easy. There's been a little things that have been hard with COVID, but honestly, it's just been great to like have all this extra time with him that we weren't expecting. Yeah. He's been super easy. We never dealt with sleep deprivation with him. He just always has liked to sleep. So that's a big thing. He's always eaten fine. Like all these things have just been like really easy. So I'm like, I think that going from 1 to 2 kids in our case is going to be a lot harder than going from 0 to 1.
Because you got like a perfect like little baby. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have one more question for you. For anybody listening who is interested in the adoption process, do you have any resources or anything that you would recommend? Like, I don't know, like join a Facebook group or any books that you read or like anything like that?
Yeah, there's so much I could say about this, honestly. Okay. This is probably what I'm like the most passionate about, just because I think it's something that doesn't get talked about as much with adoption that it should, but just there are so many resources out there that are kind of shaped towards the adoptive parent, which is great. But I think what is like really important is to find resources that are from the perspective of the adoptee themselves, because ultimately that's who's going to be the most affected by adoption. And there's so many great Instagram pages to follow, so many awesome adoptees that I'm sure I'll send you all of the people I follow. And
we'll link anything in the show notes that you send me or that you mention here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So anybody listening can, check out the show notes too.
Yeah. And also just educating yourself on, there's so many on a similar line, birth mothers out there that have a lot to say, because I think it's just so important to educate on all aspects of the, it's called the adoption triad. You know, a lot of the times people will only kind of focus on the perspective of the adoptive parent, which is important to like get that too, and to understand what it's like to be an adoptive parent. Yeah. But there's just so much more that goes into it. So one of my favorite resources, and for me personally, so we have a transracial adoption. My son is Black and we're white. The best resource that I have that I shared with all of my family members to make sure that they read it is a book called Be the Bridge, and it's the Transracial Adoption Guide. It just, again, has so many great perspectives from adoptees themselves. And I think it honestly is even applicable to just any adoption situation. It doesn't necessarily need to be transracial adoption, but just a lot of really great perspectives that can help educate anybody that's going to be part of the adoption. So grandparents and siblings and everybody. Yeah, Instagram's been a great place for me personally. And I'll share my Instagram, adoption Instagram handle. Anybody that I'm following, I think is really helpful on there. Yeah, so those are some of the big resources I can think about. But just in general, just a big word of advice is to just do as much education as you can, because, adoption is different, right? And I think, Liesel, you always advocate for in birth, right? Educating yourself on every possible thing you can. Like education is the best thing you can do. And so just trying to make sure you're really educating yourself about everybody in the process is just so important.
Yeah. Well, I love it. Well, you're right. You took the words out of my mouth. That's what I was going to say, that we love education here at Mommy Labor Nurse. So I'm glad that you did that. Well, you mentioned that you have an Instagram page. So do you want to share that for anybody who wants to follow along?
Yeah. So it's, currently we're just kind of using it more as like a capsule of what our whole process was like. So I'm not really posting on anymore. I'll still go on there and check it, but it really does. I started at the beginning of our process and then kind of finished it when we finalized the adoption in December. But so it's k.adoption.journey.
Cool. We'll link that too in the show notes page for people to check it out as well. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great, very cool episode for people. I know, probably a lot of people, maybe they're interested in adopting and they're listening to this, or maybe it's just, other moms, but it's always fun to hear other, people's situations and other people's journeys. So thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right, so that is it for this episode of the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. You probably follow me on Instagram because that's probably where you came from. But if you don't, head over to Instagram and follow me at mommy.labornurse for more. That is certainly where I am most active. I also now have a separate Instagram for just this podcast, so I encourage you to follow my second account at mommylabornurse.podcast as well if you want podcast updates. Again, that is at mommylabornurse.podcast. As always, you guys know that I also have a website where I have tons of articles all about pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, newborn stuff, and more at www.mommylabornurse.com. I want to hear more from you on how much you love this episode of the podcast or how you think I can improve. So leave me a comment on one of my pictures, send me a DM, or send me an email with all the love. All right, guys, I will see you same time, same place next week.